What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Frankie D'Astoli Show. I am your host, Frankie D'Astoli. As I always say, very excited to have you guys here. Today has just been a day. If you are watching on the video, on YouTube video, this is the face of just an exhausted person who has just been through the ringer. We have 7 refinances that are supposed to go this month, 5 of them that are supposed to go this week. We are also acquiring 3 more properties and onboarding about 3 or 4 tenants this month. It has just been nonstop. And it's one of those days where I'm just like, it was almost questionable if I was even going to get an episode in. And I recorded an episode about a couple hours ago. And of course, for some reason, I have no idea why, technical problems. I'm 18 minutes into the episode and it just decides to stop recording, but doesn't notify me as I'm screen sharing, because we're going to go through a great lesson today on how to pick your real estate market. And then I go back, I'm like, cool, I finished the video. I go back and I see that it stopped recording. So clear temptation to stop and just say, we're not getting an episode out tomorrow, meaning, you know, the day that this is going to come out, and we'll just move on. But I refuse to submit to temptation, as our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ shows us. And we at the Frankie D'Astoli Show do not submit to temptation. We get content out. We get episodes out. We make sure that and when I say we, it's myself. Christina is my moral support. We make sure that we absolutely pump as much good content and information out to you guys. And we have a strict schedule. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 5 a.m. drops. That is the schedule. That is the routine for 2025. And we're sticking to it. Now, will I say that it might not break? No. If I come down with something pretty crazy and I can't get on the mic, I might spare you guys the, aspect of listening to me sick or something along those lines. But rain, snow, shine, whatever the case might be, the Frankie D'Astoli Show goes on. And that is why we are back in the studio trying to make it happen. So as I just mentioned, I have a very, very exciting show for you guys today. We are going to talk about how to pick and how to analyze your real estate market. And if you are already an investor who has a market in place, you might find some good content out of this in regards to if you were potentially pivoting from your market, or you might actually, after hearing this, want to adjust your investment strategy within your own market where you can maximize your profits, versus if you are a new investor who maybe has 1 or 2 deals or doesn't have any deals in general. This is going to be a great episode for you to really understand what are some of the like macro and micro, things that go into a market. How do I really analyze it? What's the best strategy for me to utilize to make sure I make money? How do I mitigate risk? A bunch of these things that we're going to talk about that I'm really, really going to deep dive into. And I'm very, very excited about it. So if you are listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any of your other podcasting platforms, I just want to let you know, I am posting this video on YouTube, and I'm also going to be posting it to Dastoli'sDojoREI.com. So you'll be able to see the PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to be showing you guys, that I have that's put together. But you don't need the PowerPoint presentation in order to gain the value that's going to come from what we're talking about. You're going to be able to pretty much still get all of it through the audio. However, I am personally like a visual learner, so I like to kind of see things. I like to take notes. I do not recommend, and I definitely do not approve of taking notes while driving. So do not take notes if you're driving. Even if you're at a red light, don't put your phone out. It's not worth it. So just listen to it. You're going to gain a ton from the audio. And then afterwards, you can, if you choose to, go to YouTube and find the video and the PowerPoint on YouTube, or you could go to Dastoli'sDojoREI.com and you could get it there. But if you are watching on YouTube, please please subscribe, please comment on the video. Give me your guys' thoughts. Give me your questions, all of that stuff. If you're listening on any of the podcasting platforms, please follow, please rate it, please review it. I love your guys' feedback. I love hearing what you're pulling from the show. It makes it all worthwhile for me to do. And my Instagram handle, guys, is Frankie D'Astoli_REI. Send me DMs. I am answering every single DM that hits my inbox. And anybody that sent me a DM, you know I'm answering usually within an hour. If I'm not answering within an hour, it's either because I'm recording an episode or I'm in some sort of mentorship with one of my students or I'm touring properties. That's really the only reason why I do not actually answer, or I'm in prayer. That could be a possibility as well. But overall, I'm answering any DMs. Send me any DMs that you guys have. So I'm very excited to kick this episode off. If you guys haven't seen my last episode, I also do a PowerPoint presentation on that one. You can find that on YouTube as well. You can find that on any podcasting platform, or you can find it at Dastoli'sDojoREI.com. It is how to acquire your next real estate deal without breaking the bank. I literally show you guys how to get your next deal without spending a dime out of pocket or we go up to at most $200 if you wanted to do a little bit of damage to get a little more creative and get more direct to seller leads. But if you haven't listened or watched that, available, you can find that anywhere that you find the Frankie D'Astoli Show, or also on D'Astoli's Dojo, rei.com. One last thing I'll say before we kind of kick it off into the screen share. Exodus 90 is 12 days away. This episode's coming out on January 8th. The Exodus 90 journey starts on January 20th. Exodus 90, for anybody that didn't listen to the last episode, I really get into detail on it. But Exodus 90 is a 90-day spiritual retreat for Catholic men and aspiring Catholic men. I've had some people in my group that weren't fully Catholic at the moment, but they were going through the whole process of converting to Catholicism. Exodus 90 is for Catholic men, aspiring Catholic men. It's a 90-day retreat that brings you through the book of Exodus and really shows you how to find freedom in uncommon ways. There's a lot that goes into this, but one thing I will say is I did Exodus 90 last year in 2024. It started on January 1st. It ended on Easter, and it was a truly, truly life-changing experience. I am the person that I am today because of that spiritual retreat. And if you're like, if you go back and listen, there's a bunch of disciplines that go into it. I'll just kind of give you guys a few. So the whole basis of it is to find freedom in uncommon ways. So when we look at, uncommon ways, we need to look at the things that we're attached to on a daily basis, right? So when you do the Exodus 90 group, there's a handful of things that you need to let go of. One of them, and this is already going to turn some people off, one of them is warm showers. You can no longer take hot showers. You can only take cold showers. And again, I know this is pretty crazy. People are probably like, there's no way I'm doing it. Everybody that was in my Exodus group, they ranged from 21 years old to like 70 years old. Like, I promise you guys, anybody could do this. And even to this day, a full year later, I only take cold showers. They're phenomenal for your immune system. They wake you up. They lock you in. They keep you laser focused. You got to get rid of sweeteners, right? No coffee with creamer, no soda, no energy drinks, none of that stuff. So I go strictly to black coffee. I'm a black iced coffee guy. And even still to this day, it's cold shower to black iced coffee. That's the recipe for success. You also got to give up TV. You got to give up video games. You got to give up a handful of other things. You have to dedicate an hour a day to prayer. Some of you guys might be saying, I can't even dedicate 5 minutes to prayer. This is why I constantly say, pray the rosary, buy real estate. Praying the rosary is 15 to 20 minutes of intentional prayer that brings you into the life of Jesus Christ and our Blessed Mother Mary. Pray the rosary every single day. It's 15 to 20 minutes of prayer. And I promise you, if you start praying the rosary, you're going to open your mind up to more meditation, to more communion with God. And eventually that hour is going to become very, very simple. I was praying at some points doing Exodus for 2 to 3 hours. I'm not saying this to brag or to be boastful. I'm saying this to let you know that like you can get to that level of prayer as well. And since then, I have fallen out of that a little bit. That's why I'm very much looking forward to getting back into Exodus. But there's so many things that come along with it. There's even more to it. If you want to learn more, go listen to the other episode or download the Exodus 90 app. You'll get all of that information. But if you are listening to this and you are a Catholic man or aspiring Catholic man and you want to do this spiritual journey, I am putting together a little subgroup aside from my main core group of Exodus men that I do this journey with, that I would love to see if it makes sense to bring you into that subgroup as well. So feel free to message me, DM me, Frankie D'Astoli _REI. I could give you some more details on that and see if it ends up working out. But we are going to break into the screen share here, and I am very excited for this episode. I think you guys are going to get a ton of value of it. I think it's something that's just overall not really talked about too much. I think everybody kind of goes into the fact of like, I just want to start buying properties. I just want to start getting into real estate. Like, I want to do it. This is a very, very important and critical piece to really get down before you get into real estate investing. And the main reason why that is, guys, I'll tell you this right now. I dropped an episode a while back on, if you're breaking into real estate, what are some of the pros and cons? And one of the cons, in my opinion, the biggest con for real estate investing is the fact that it's illiquid. Illiquid means that when I buy a piece of property, my money is tied up to that property until I sell it or refinance out of it, right? So when you buy a stock, that's not the case. I could buy a stock right now, tonight, and I could sell it in 20 minutes later or the next day or a week or whenever I really choose, right? Whereas with real estate, when you buy that property, you are married to that property at least for a period of time. If you are flipping it, you need to renovate it, you need to sell it, right? If you are going to do some sort of burr on it, you're going to, renovate it and then refinance on it. Or if you're a long-term investor, you might be married to this thing for, 10, 20, 30 years, if not for life, right? So real estate investing is illiquid. That's why it becomes even more important to really understand the market that you're buying into, because once you buy into that, you might not necessarily get a ticket home as fast as you want, right? Or if you needed to back out of it quickly. So this is going to be a very valuable episode. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to share my screen right now. Just hang with me. So here we go. D'Astoli's Dojo for real estate investing, picking your real estate market. I'm very, very excited about this episode. We're going to start breaking this down. Before we get into it, a little bit about me. Some of you guys have been listening to the show for a while. You may even be part of my dojo. You already know some of this, but for anybody that's brand new, this is your first episode. I'll just give you guys kind of a quick background on what gives me the right and the ability to actually talk about these types of things. So I started wholesaling real estate in September of 2021. I've personally wholesaled over $1 million in assignment fees, but something I'm even more proud of is I've helped others wholesale over $1.2 million in assignment fees. And I did this nationwide. I traveled all over the place. I was in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee, Alabama, Texas. I was all over the place working with reps, working with other wholesalers, helping them get their wholesaling goals achieved and getting them off the ground. I have since then, since about April of this past year, I've really transitioned into buying a lot of properties. And now I mainly do the BRRRR method where I buy properties at a discount, I renovate them, I rent them out, I refinance them, and I repeat. I have a great partner that I work alongside with. We currently own a portfolio of 17 properties, 19 doors. I'm also a third-degree black belt in karate, a white belt in jiu-jitsu. That's where D'Astoli's Dojo comes into place. I combine two of my favorite things, real estate and martial arts. And I'm also married with a 1-year-old daughter who is the love of my life and a son on the way. So that's all you're going to hear for about the rest of this about me. There is some necessary vocab that's really, really important that we cover before we continue on this path. So the first term is called macro market. So macro market, what you want to look at when you want to understand is the macro market is the behavior, the performance, and the decisions of the market as a whole. Now, when we refer to the real estate market, we're really referring to one of two markets. We're referring to either residential or commercial. For the sake of this entire training and most of the stuff that I talk on, we're really going to focus in residential. But when you hear macro, think about the entirety of like the nation, the entire country, decisions made at a higher level that affect the real estate market as a whole. Micro market is behavior, performance, and decisions in relations to your specific market. So let's just say you are looking to invest in Jacksonville, Florida. And in Jacksonville, Florida, there is a new Amazon company that's coming over there. That is an effect within the micro market, right? That new Amazon is going to drive up population. It's going to drive up job growth. It's going to drive up median income. It could do a bunch of different things, but that's solely affected in the micro, not in the macro. An Amazon company moving to Jacksonville, Florida doesn't affect what goes on in Memphis, Tennessee, right? So that's one way that you need to look at that. Acquisitions is the process of acquiring a new real estate deal. So think about if you find a lead, whether it's through a real estate agent or you did exactly what we talked about in the prior episode of how to acquire your next deal without breaking the bank. You might have done some driving for dollars. When you get a property under contract and you close on it, that is the process of acquisitions. The opposite end of that spectrum is what's called dispositions. Dispositions is the process of exiting a real estate deal. So after you acquire that deal, what are you doing next? Are you flipping it? Are you using it as a rental? Are you going to do a short-term rental on it? Are you, going to do some sort of, creative deal? Whatever the case might be, are you going to wholesale it? All of that stuff is the process of dispositions. And then the last term we're going to talk about before we get into it is barrier to entry. Barrier to entry is the ease or the difficulty of entering a market, right? So if you were going to target a market, let's just say Cincinnati, Ohio, how easy is it for you to get a deal there? How easy is it for you to, get somebody to rent your property as a tenant? That's stuff that you want to understand when you think about barrier to entry. So we're going to move on. The first question you need to ask yourself when determining if this is a market that you want to invest in is, what is your real estate investing strategy? So I'm going to talk about mainly the top 3 real estate investing strategies. We're going to talk about flipping, buying, holding, and wholesaling. Now, there are a bunch of different strategies. There's house hacking, which we've talked about a handful of times on the show. There's, apartment syndication. There's investing in small businesses like laundromats that come with real estate, right? There's a bunch of different things that you could do. So instead of getting into the weeds on all of those other ones, I mainly just want to focus on the main core 3. So the first one is flipping. The art of flipping is when you buy a property, you renovate it to force appreciation, and then you sell it typically, not every single time, but in most cases, to an end buyer that is a homeowner. right? And that's a different, I want to make sure that I differentiate there, because you could almost, in some markets, you could sell turnkey properties to investors where then they become buy and hold investors with that turnkey property. But for the sake of examples and determining your market, we are going to focus on the flipping is like you're selling a property to a homeowner. Buy and hold is when you buy a property, you potentially do some renovations to it. In some cases, you might not. You might be buying like that turnkey property, or you might be doing some sort of BRRRR deal, like I mentioned, where you buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. So you might do some renovations, but the exit there is you rent it out to a tenant. You're going to hold that property at least for the near future, right? And you're renting it out to a tenant and you're creating some sort of cash flow scenario there. The third is wholesaling real estate. Wholesaling real estate is when you acquire the rights to purchase a property. However, you then go and sell those rights to an investor. So again, wholesaling is really, guys, where I got my start and really like laid the foundation for everything that I do now, in addition to buying my first house hack. But when you wholesale real estate, this is an important differentiator. You never actually acquire the property. So when you buy to flip a home or you buy to use it as a rental, you take ownership of that property. You buy it, you own it, right? It's in your name, or hopefully it's in an LLC. When you wholesale a deal, you never actually buy the property, which means you don't actually even need credit. You don't need reserves. You don't need to go through a lender. You don't need to do all of those other things. You are just selling the rights of the contract that you have to purchase that property to an investor, and that investor buys the deal and closes on it, and they give you what's called an assignment fee. That's how a wholesaler makes money. So a flipper makes money when they sell the property. A buy and hold investor makes money when they collect rent. A wholesaler makes money when they collect an assignment fee from selling the rights of a contract. So now that you kind of have an idea of like what your investment strategy could be, and again, we'll use those three as examples, we need to understand what strategy works best in the target market. So if you are looking at a potential market, which strategy works best in that market? So let's talk about flipping first. When we flip houses, here's a few ideals that you want to look for. And this isn't everything that you want to look for, but in my opinion, when I was putting these lists together, this is what's most important. I want to look for a high level of ownership within a particular market, right? So again, I'll use let's just use like Boston, Massachusetts. Probably maybe not the best example, but whatever. Use some place based Boston, Massachusetts. If I'm going to go invest in real estate in Boston and I'm going to flip houses, let's just say, I'm using round numbers here. Let's just say there's 100,000 houses and 90,000 of those homes are owner occupied homes. They are owned and occupied by the person whose name the property is in. So if John Smith owns 123 Main Street, John Smith lives in 123 Main Street. When I have that data, what I understand is it's much more of a owner occupied area versus a tenant occupied area. And that's a positive for me as a flipper, because most of the time I'm going to be flipping these houses to owner occupants. So I want to see that there's high levels of ownership. Vice versa on that could be if there was 100,000 houses and 70,000 of them were absentee owners, meaning that they're not occupied by the owner, they're occupied by a tenant. That shows me that there's not a ton of pride and ownership in that area just yet, and I might want to necessarily stay away from flipping there. That's one variable. That's one statistic that I'll look at. Another one that you want to find when it comes to flipping, especially, is strong sales comps. I want to see that these properties are selling for the price points that I believe my house will sell for when it's fixed up. If I think my house is going to sell for $500,000, but all I'm seeing on these comps is houses that are selling for $400,000, I should not put much stock in the fact that my house is going to sell for $500,000. I should really try to avoid that. I need to see other comparables in the home also selling for $500,000 to give me the confidence to go out there and do that job and flip that property. The last one on this is low days on market. This is a way to determine how quickly your house is going to sell, and if you're in a hot micro market within that sub area, or if you're in a colder one. So if you see houses are selling within their days on market is 4 days, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, that's a really good indicator. That means that when they listed the home for sale, within 4 days, 5 days, 10 days, whatever it was already under contract. That's great as a flipper. That shows you that there's good demand for the property. It also decreases your holding costs. The opposite end of that is if you are looking at sales comps and you're seeing that these houses are sitting for 75 days, 90 days, even 60 days sometimes. That's an indicator that the market is a little bit slower there. The demand isn't that high. And you as a flipper, it doesn't make it impossible, but it means that you may want to budget a little bit longer for your holding costs because you might have that property sitting vacant for a couple months, 2, 3, 4 months in some cases. So that's something that you definitely want to keep an eye on. One last thing I'll say about flipping too, that's not necessarily on this slideshow here, is you also want to look at active comps, right? So when put yourself in the shoes of like a homeowner. You go into a market and let's just say there's 5 houses for sale. You now have 5 options to choose from. I could now get, picky depending on what type of demand is in the area on what house that I want, right? So if I'm an investor, I need to be looking at what's my competition. If there's 5 or 10 active, comps on the market all around the same price point, how is my house going to stand out, especially if the demand's not high enough or all these are flying off the shelf? Usually, in order for my comp to stand out, for my property to stand out, I'm probably going to have to be priced more aggressively than the houses that are currently on the market, or I'm going to need to really turn up my renovations to make it much nicer than those properties. So again, that's another variable that you want to look at. What's your competition? Who else is out there? And what are they trying to sell? What product are they trying to sell on the market? Now, if you're going for a buy and hold strategy, right? Let's say you want to be more in for the longer term. You want to maybe more focus on building that generational wealth. This is personally my preference. I'm more of a buy and hold investor. There's a few things that I look at when I'm determining if I'm going to enter into a market. Number one is I want to see high rental demand. So in a similar scenario like we used, if there's 100,000 properties and 90,000 of them are owner occupied and only 10,000 are absentee, meaning that they're tenant occupied, I might not necessarily want to enter that market. It might just be an indicator that there's really not a lot of rentals going around, and there just might not be a ton of demand for rentals. That might be a much more owner-occupant area. Now, this has gotten a little bit like hairy and a little bit different over the past few years as I feel like we're entering into a little bit more of like a renter nation. So even then, I might still enter, but really what I want to see is I want to see high rental demand. I want to see people that are in there that are going in there, they want to become tenants in that particular area. I can double check this by looking at strong rental comps. If I see that there were comps that were listed for rent, and similarly, like we look at with days on market for flipping houses, if I'm seeing that these rental comps are listing, let's just say they list for $2,000 a month, and they're already being put under contract and under lease, within 5-10 days, that's a great indicator that there's strong rental demand and there's strong rental comps in that area. Another thing that I'll look at is I really want to see more of like low rental supply. And this goes the same when I look at like active comps for flipping. If I am going to be a landlord and I'm going to, produce rental properties, if I look on the MLS or on Zillow or on Redfin or whatever it is, and I see there's a ton of rentals out there, again, what differentiates my property from all these other, investors that are putting their properties out for rent? It's going to unfortunately have to be one of those two things. I'm either going to have to do my renovations significantly nicer, or I'm going to have to drop my rental price. And whether you're flipping or you're doing the rental aspect, it's very, very risky to bank on doing better renovations and getting a higher rental, price point or getting a higher purchase price point when you sell your house. So you really need to be more priced aggressively in those types of situations, which is going to hurt your return and ultimately just might not be something that's fruitful for you in that market. So when you're in that buy and hold, just to recap, you really want to see good rental demand. You want to see that there's a lot of renters in that area. You want to see strong rental comps that are moving quickly, and you don't want a ton of rental comp supply out there because unfortunately you're going to have to just price yourself aggressively and you might price yourself out of that market. The last thing we're going to talk about in this is wholesaling. Wholesaling, guys, this is what I want you to understand. Wholesaling can work in any single market. It doesn't matter if it's a flipper market, if the exit strategy is better in flipping for that particular market or buy and hold, because as a wholesaler, you really just cater to your investors. If you get a deal under contract and you know that it's a much bigger flip market, then you are going to price your deal to attract flippers. That's how you're going to do it as a wholesaler. So regardless of really strategy, wholesaling could work in any single market, whereas buy and hold and flipping, you might need to be a little bit more strategic about which market you enter into using that type of exit strategy. This is the fun ones, guys. This is where it's going to get fun. Know the macro and micro market factors. All right. So we talked about macro and micro. We talked about macro being the overall market, the overall economy, the overall real estate market, whereas micro is more of those select sub pockets, right? Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or Cleveland, Ohio, or, Los Angeles, California, wherever it is. It's more of those sub markets that you're looking at micro factors. So let's talk about a few here. And this is a mix of macro and micro, but interest rates is a micro factor, right? Oh, I'm sorry, a macro, I apologize, a macro factor. Interest rates comes directly from the Fed. They determine if they are going to raise or lower interest rates. And to dumb this down even further, because some of this might be brand new to a lot of you guys, trust me when I tell you, there's nothing that is going to seem like it's too much. Like I needed to really, like you need to explain things to me like a 5-year-old sometimes, you really do. But an interest rate is this. If I lend you $100,000, I am not going to just want $100,000 back. I'm going to want $110,000 back. And by doing that, I implement an interest rate that makes sure that I receive that 10% return in that scenario. The banks do the same exact thing, right? So when the Fed increases interest rates, although I don't want to get too much in the weeds, when the Fed increases interest rates, it doesn't always direct the real estate economy. The real estate economy is based off a few other factors, but overall, let's just say it does. When interest rates go up or down, it affects what's called the purchasing power of homeowners, mainly of homeowners, right? It affects the purchasing power of everybody. But when you're talking about someone who's going to go buy a house, it affects their purchasing power. And purchasing power is made up of 3 factors. Interest rate is 1, purchase price is 2, and income is 3. So let's look at it as almost like a pie chart in a sense, right? Let's assume that you have a mortgage payment of $1,500, right, with an interest rate of 7%. And let's just say before you lock in that rate and before you lock in that mortgage, interest rates jump up to 8%. And because of that, your mortgage payment goes from $1,500 to, let's just call it $1,600. Your purchasing power just went down by $100. So if I'm an employee and I make $5,000 a month and my mortgage payment was $1,500, but now it's $1,600, I just lost $100 on what I could use to go out and buy other things. Let's just say I want to go buy a property and, I find a property that is $100,000, but the market, increases and the prices go up and now it's $150,000. And because of that, same thing, it increases my mortgage by, let's say, $200. My purchasing power has gone down $200. If I make $5,000 a month in income and I get a promotion and I get a raise and now I make $7,000 a month in income, my purchasing power has gone up $2,000 a month, right? All of that, all those 3 factors, interest rate, purchasing or purchase price, and income affects the purchasing power of homeowners. So if your interest rate goes up, your purchasing power as a homeowner goes down. Why is this important for flippers? Well, if I purchase a property and I purchase it and I expect to sell it for $300,000, but by the time I go to sell it, interest rates go up, meaning that my homeowners that are going to buy the property, their purchasing power decreases. I might need to come down from my $300,000 price to $275,000. And that's how that could quickly eat at a flipper's profits. So it's important to know how interest rates affect the macroeconomics. How does this affect cash flow? So let's say interest rates go up. If I'm a landlord, right, and I was projecting a 7% interest rate and I had a cash flow projection of about $400 a month, and now interest rates go up to 8%, that eats away at my cash flow. So as a buy and hold investor, I also need to be planning for, different movements on the interest rate. Now, guys, this all sounds negative, but if interest rates go down, guess what? Usually in a most common market, we live in a little bit of a chaotic, crazy real estate market right now. But in most cases, when interest rates go down, purchase prices will sometimes rise in that sense, but you'll have a little bit of kind of like a balance there. But if I'm a buy and hold investor and my interest rate goes down, that's a really great sign. It usually is going to increase my cash flow. So there's a lot of kind of moving parts to it, but you want to just understand that if interest rates go up, it usually tightens purchasing power. If interest rates go down, prices don't go up too much, it could open up more purchasing power for homeowners. And a lot of times in that case, as flippers, investors, we tend to make a little bit more money. The next one is rent controls. Rent control is pretty much like, if I could rent out a 3-bedroom apartment for $2,000 and the government or whoever comes in and says, hey, we need to cap this at $1,800, right? This could also be more of a micro thing. It could also be more of a macro thing. So you just kind of need to know. But how does this affect flipping houses? If a rent control is instilled, flipping houses, you would think that it really doesn't matter too much, right? Because when you're a flipper, you're not a landlord. You are selling it to an end buyer and you're washing your hands with the property. But if rent controls are increased, you might have some landlords who no longer want to be in the buy and hold business because they don't want to be restricted. So they might actually pivot to flipping houses. And that's going to also increase demand in a particular market on the acquisition side. So you'll need to be aware of that if you are a flipper. If you see rent controls start to be put in place, you might end up seeing a few more sharks in the water around you looking for some food. How does this affect cash flow? If you have a rent control, so let's say you're projecting to make $2,000 on this property every month and your mortgage payment's $1,500 and someone comes in and slaps a rent control of $1,800, guess what? Your $500 gross, cash flow just dropped to $300. So as a buy and hold investor, you want to be aware of any macro or micro movements that can seed to rent controls. And usually if you're getting some tightening on rent controls, again, you may end up pivoting to becoming a little bit more of a flipper because there's a little bit less, restriction in that regard. Let's talk about restrictions for flippers, though. We talk about capital gains. Capital gains is a tax that's put on any gain on a property when you sell it. Now, this could go for buy and hold investors also. I don't want to just categorize this to flips, but it's most commonly known for when you have a flipper, right? So if I buy a property for 100, I put 50 into it, it's worth 225, I sell it. With all things equal, I make a $75,000 profit, not including any closing costs or anything like that. I would pay a percentage on that 75,000. That's considered a capital gain, right? So this affects profits on a flip. So if you see any movement with capital gains taxes, it's going to take away from the profits on a flip. Why is this important? A, it takes away if you're going to be a flipper from what you can make. But as a landlord, just as the same example applied with rent controls, you might start seeing a few more sharks in the water when it comes to buy and hold because there's a little bit less restrictive, concerns around that. The last one we'll talk about is population. And population really, really helps and affects towards supply and demand, which is going to be big in the next slides that we have talking about. But when you have population, it could affect supply and demand. So if you have an increase in population, I'll go back to the example we talked about where if an Amazon was moving into, I think I might have said like Jacksonville, Florida, or whatever it was. If an Amazon is moving in there and it's bringing, let's just say 1,000 job openings to that area and people are moving from all different places to go work at Amazon in Jacksonville, Florida, or whatever the case might be, this is going to significantly affect supply because let's just say 1,000 people are moving in and let's just say there's 500 available properties. Now we are going to have a big supply deficit. We're going to have a deficit of 500 houses. And what's going to happen to demand? Demand is going to go through the roof, right? So what happens in that when there's a low supply and there's high demand? It brings in some opportunity. It brings in opportunity for developers. It brings in opportunities for both flippers and buy and hold investors to go in that area, find some uninhabitable, distressed properties that they could renovate, they could fix up, they could resell to invest to homeowners, or they could end up using as rentals. So when supply is low and demand is high, there's usually opportunity for a lot of people to eat there. But it could work the opposite way too, right? Let's just say the Amazon decided to move out of Jacksonville, Florida, and it decreased 1,000, properties out of there. Now all of a sudden you have this massive influx in supply and you have this low influx in demand. So population is a really, really important factor to keep an eye on really that micro and even that macro level. You could look at it from a macro level. Where are a lot of people migrating to? And that's a way that you can make some decisions on investing also. And on that note, I don't have it on the slideshow, but that's a really big factor that you want to look at. You also want to look at if you're looking in a particular area, what is like the medium income in that particular area, right? What is the, percentage of job employment in that area? These are all things that you want to be looking at when you are determining, to invest in a market. And that's really more of like on a micro level. So next question, what is the barrier to entry and how does it affect acquisitions and dispositions? So we're really going to get into a high talk about supply and demand here because that's really what determines like a lot of the micro market stuff. So is there a high supply and little demand? If there is a high supply and little demand, and let's even use that example again, if like Amazon ended up pivoting and packing up their bags and moving out of, let's say, Jacksonville, Florida, you're going to have a higher supply of houses. So it actually makes acquisitions, actually getting a property under contract a lot easier, right? Because now it's pretty much like you are going into an ocean that's full of fish and you could say, I'm either going to use a rod or I'm going to use a net or I'm going to, go in there with my bare hands and start grabbing fish. Like, you have so many options, and you could get a lot of properties under contract when there's a high supply and not so much demand. Now, when there's not so much demand, it makes the dispositions more challenging. And if you guys remember, which I'm sure you do, the dispositions is your exit strategy. So if I go into a high supply area and I pick up a property, and I could probably get it for a great discount because there's a lot of, supply out there, what I do with that after is now becoming a little bit more challenging. Is there really any rental demand for that property for me to be a buy and hold investor? Is there any pride of ownership coming into this area where I could flip this property? I might have such an easy way of getting deals, but I have no way to make money on those deals. That's something that you need to be aware of. Now, in most markets, there's still some sort of way to make money. But you just need to be prepared. You might need to underwrite your deals more aggressively. That's all stuff that comes with it. But when you have a higher supply, it's easier to get into those deals. It's easier to acquire them, but it's usually harder to get out of them and to disposition them, whether that's through a rental or through flipping it. And it's the same vice versa. If there's a low supply and high demand, it's harder at that point to get acquisitions. You might not be able to jump in the ocean barehanded. You might need a massive net, or you might need to start being really strategic in certain spots that you go when you go fishing, because it's going to be a lot harder to get a deal under contract. But once you get that deal and you close on it, the world is your oyster at that point. You have a bunch of different options on what you could do. If there's, good opportunity in flipping, you might want to flip it. If it's a great buy and hold area and the rental demand is really high, you might want to use it as a rental. Or if you're a wholesaler, either one, whether the supply is low and the demand is high, or vice versa, you can make money there. It's just a matter of how you're getting your deals and who you're targeting to be your disposition investor. This last question, it's not so much like integrated into this, but it's a good question to ask yourself. Will you be investing full-time or part-time, right? And the reason that I say this is, like, I jumped out of my job and I went into investing full-time, and I went into a market that had good balance, right? And that's ideally what you want to find. You want to find a market that's got some good balance, but I would say mine lays a little bit more on the higher supply and a little bit on the lower demand. I make a living in a heavy rental area, and I'm mainly a buy and hold investor. I still wholesale. I still, sling a bunch of wholesale deals, but I am mainly at this point, if I'm getting a deal that I really like, my partner and I were closing on it. So when you're going into this, if you're going into this as a full-time investor, what you want to understand is, like, do I want to build a portfolio? Do I want to go into a place where it's going to be a lot easier for me to pick up some deals and I could still find a way to make money on them? I can underwrite them really aggressively. Or am I doing this maybe a little bit more part-time, and I just really need to find like that 1 or 2 deals a year, and I could do that in a really high demand area, because once I get those deals, I'm a little more patient. I could get those deals. I know that I'm going to make money on them. And again, my strategy is not something that I necessarily recommend for everybody. My partner and I closed on 16 properties over the last 8 months. We did that in an area where there's some good supply already, but then we went direct to seller and we got a lot of deals through direct to seller. But I have a student in D'Astoli's dojo who did 1 deal last year, but he did it and he made a profit of $130,000 on his flip. So he doesn't need to do 16 deals, right? He made 130 grand off 1 deal, and he has a 9 to 5 where he's already making great money. So again, it's just a question of what your preferences, if you prefer to be full-time or you prefer to be part-time, what your long-term strategy is, all of that stuff, all things that we've talked about in prior lessons. Wholesalers, it's important to know that all of this affects your efforts. Supply, demand, knowing where investors are, where they want to buy, knowing where your sellers are going to be, how you could get properties under contract. As a wholesaler, it's really, really important. The barrier to entry as a wholesaler is actually lower than any other investment strategy. It's lower than buy and hold. It's lower than flipping. Again, like I mentioned, you don't need credit to wholesale. You don't need reserves to wholesale. You don't need to know a lender. You don't need to know an insurance agent. None of that stuff. I recommend you have an LLC. That's pretty much the bare minimum of what I would say on that. But you can enter and exit as you please. That's what makes wholesaling so attractive in a lot of cases. It breaks kind of that illiquid con of real estate. But it's important to know all of these micro and macro effects on all of the markets that you're going to be wholesaling in. The last thing I'm going to end this with is common questions and answers when picking your real estate market. I've just come up with a few that were on top of my mind. Again, you guys feel free to message me on Instagram, Frankie D'Astoli _REI. You got to ask me any questions that you guys have, or go to Dastoli'sDojoREI.com. There's a chat box. You could talk to me, or I'll even give you my email, sensei@Dastoli'sDojoREI.com. But here's a few that I came up with. Number 1, how do I mitigate the risk of investing in a new market? This is actually a question that any investor could ask on how to mitigate risk. And my number one answer to this is have multiple exit strategies when you get a deal under contract. So if you are getting a deal under contract, and let's say your main plan is to flip the property, you want to know that if, everything goes wrong and things hit the fan, that you could at least make this into a rental, right? Or that in some way you could at least get it cleaned up in some regard and demand is high enough where you could sell it to another investor on the market. Or that if things go wrong before you close, that you could wholesale out of it. When you have more exit strategies lined up in the queue, just in case your first one doesn't work out, that significantly mitigates risk. Because if your only plan is to flip it and there's no rental demand here and things go wrong, that's when you run into problems. And that's where a lot of investors get a really bad taste in their mouth because they had one deal that didn't go well and ultimately they just didn't plan enough, plan A's, plan B's, plan C's. So really, if you want to mitigate risk especially going into a new market, make sure that you could utilize a few different exits. So like, I'll give you guys an example. You buy a property for 200 grand, you put $50,000 into it, you expect to sell it for 350 and you list it on the market and it's not selling. So now you drop your price, you're at, let's just say 315 and it's not selling. At that point, you might be able to refinance out of that property, put it on long-term debt, a 15-year note or a 30-year note meaning a mortgage, and then bring a tenant in there where you could at least break even on that property and you don't start losing money, right? That's a way to really just make sure like, all right, if everything went south for me, I could still get out of this deal and get out unscathed. Next question. Do I need to invest in the area I live in? This is a good question to ask yourself. The short answer to this is no, you don't. But a lot of it, I think, depends on like level of control that you want, right? So like I invest about 40 minutes outside of where I live. It's great for me. I could get there every day if I want to. I'm really in my market probably like once a week. My partner, Steve, lives about 15 minutes outside from where we invest. So he's there a lot more often looking at the projects, doing a lot of the boots on the ground stuff. But really, you need to understand like how much control and how much hands-on control and boots on the ground control do I want? And how much am I okay letting go of and operating it from a distance? So like if you want to be there, you want to be in the projects, you want to see what's going on, you want to talk to the tenants in person, you want to shake hands with the contractors, it's easier to invest in an area that you live in, or at least you live close to where you could get to it pretty much anytime that you really need to. But the second question that kind of goes into that, the next one is, how do I go about investing out of state? So if you are someone who's like, I don't need to be there all the time. I, feel comfortable hiring a few people in a different area to go check on some stuff or whatever the case might be, you might be able to invest out of state. And I'll give you kind of two scenarios on this. Let's just say like you live in, let's just say you live in Kentucky and you want to invest in Texas, right? And you might maybe go to some sort of mastermind group or some sort of meetup and you meet some people that live in Texas and you really want to invest in there. And you might say, hey, look, you live in Texas, like I live in Kentucky. There's no way that like I can go out to Texas all the time to like do these deals. Like, how about we joint venture on some deals? If you could be my boots on the ground, like checking on the projects, we're talking with the tenants, all of that stuff. I will bring the financing to the table, or I will, do all the underwriting or whatever the case might be, right? At that point, you are bringing something to the table and you're finding somebody who could be your boots on the ground to help you invest in that particular area that you want to. There's also a secondary thing that you could do on this. You can really just hire out, right? Like you could go out, you can maybe fly out to that market or drive out to that market, whatever the case is, look at some properties, make some relationships with some agents while you're there, make some relationships with some lenders while you're there, some contractors while you're there. And guys, if you do this, open an LLC and write all of that stuff off. I'm not a tax accountant. I'm not a specialist. So like, please don't take anything that I say as legal advice. But like, if you open an LLC and you want to become an investor and you go out and you fly out to that LLC, to that state, and you are looking at properties for, I believe it's like 4 to 4.5 hours per day, it's considered a work trip. And I got that directly from Tom Wheelwright's books, Tax-Free Wealth, which is a great book that you guys should absolutely read. But if you want to do that and you want to go out of state, go out, visit that state, look at some properties, make some relationships. And instead of JVing, you might be able to just form some relationships in there where you just pay some people for doing some jobs for you. And you could start building a portfolio or doing some flips, whatever you prefer. Next question. What if I am unsure about which real estate investing strategy I want to use? Here's a good one, guys. I don't want to say like, test out strategies necessarily, because like I mentioned, real estate is illiquid. And if you buy a deal that you want to use as like a buy and hold, and you buy in a bad market and you get a bad tenant, or you don't get a tenant at all, it could put a really sour taste in your mouth, and it could really totally like swing your confidence level down and affect that swagger that I talk about is so important when you're buying real estate. So I think the best answer to this, and even to that next question of what if I'm stuck in market analysis paralysis, is talk to investors that are in that market that are doing what you want to do. That is the best advice that I could give in these scenarios. I have made so many decisions based off of data that I've gotten from people that I trust. And again, you might not necessarily be able to trust every single person that you talk to in a particular market that's doing things, but if you could get some sort of proof in the pudding, it'll help you make decisions. So if you're unsure about which strategy you want to use, find out what strategies other people are using and what their success looks like, but also make sure that that aligns with what you want to do as your vision and as your goal. Like if you want to build generational wealth, you can't get there really by flipping houses unless you take the gains from those houses and buy rentals that are eventually going to lead to, you cash flowing and appreciating year over year and passing that wealth on to your, next generation. That's why it's called generational wealth. So you need to know what aligns with your long-term goals. But you also want to make sure you don't go into a market where it doesn't align with your long-term goals. So talk to people that are in that market that are doing the strategies that you're interested in. Get as much data as you can, as much quantitative data as you can, and really understand what it is to do that strategy in that particular market. And that all goes with what if you're stuck in market analysis paralysis. Talk to those people that are in that market so you can really understand, is this a market that I actually want to target? And with that, guys, that's where I'm going to wrap it. So again, you can follow me on Instagram, Frankie D'Astoli _REI. Please DM me any questions that you guys have. And if you're interested in doing Exodus 90, that starts on January 20th. It runs to April 20th. Please DM me on that as well. D'Astoli's Dojo, REI.com. You could find this video on there, but you could also go on to Stoli'sDojoREI.com. You could sign up for any of our courses, any of our mentorship programs. All of our courses and mentorship programs are run by myself. And if you are listening to this, to the Frankie D'Astoli Show, you will get 10% off on all courses and mentorship programs if you use the code TFDS10. TFDS10, you will get 10% off. So I really appreciate it. This was a great lesson. I'm very excited to be able to put it out for you guys. And if you guys have any questions, like I said, please feel to reach out to me. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and peace out. I'll talk to you later.